Ladies and gentlemen, Weekend Modder here today with a tutorial video on how to perform the RGH modification. Today we're going to be modifying this slim S-series console. I wanted to walk through a couple of the things that I look at when I'm preparing for RGHing the console and kind of give you guys some clues on how I handle that. So this particular console was manufactured in 2013. The first month, so January 2013, as you can see there. That tells me pretty conclusively, basically for sure, that this is going to be a Corona motherboard console. Any Xbox S series manufactured 2011-07 or later, so July 2011 or later, is almost certainly going to be a Corona. And then I also separately have powered this console up, connected it to a monitor and stuff, and seen that it shows a 4 gig onboard module and has no hard drive or anything here. So given that we know it's a Corona based on the date, and we know it's a 4 gig based on seeing the memory in the settings, we can anticipate that this is a Corona 4 gig NAND console. So the way that we'll modify that is using the SD tool version 2.1 to read and write the NAND. We'll probably have to install a postfix adapter in order to get post signal. And then we will use an ACE V3 chip with its default timing file. So the ACE V3's default timing is for Corona consoles, so we won't even have to reprogram the timing file on this chip. So, if you're interested in checking out how to mod this console, hang out with me and we'll do just that. Alright, so back to the nitty-gritty. There are lots of videos online on how to open an Xbox 360 case. I normally don't do this part on camera, but again, I'm trying to give everybody here some insight into how I go about doing that most of the time. Let's see. Sorry about that. My wife had stolen my screw gun here. There we go. All right, with the two end caps off, you can just release both ends here. There's little retaining clips that are going to be impossible to get on camera, so I'm not even trying. And that's how you get the back off. This part, I'm going to guess I'll fast forward. All right, so with that done, what we're going to want to do next is release the faceplate here. So right in here, you can see where the faceplate has a ribbon cable that is attached to the front ring of light board. And what you want to do is lift that retaining bit of plastic up and off. And then if you have your finger in here, you can then just kind of pull it, and you can see how that was wrapped around there before, and now it's loose. So with that loose, we can flip the console over, lift up, faceplate comes off cleanly, the rest of the console comes off, and then the last two screws are right there in the faceplate, or rather the RF board is what I meant to say. All right, break it down for RGH. DVD drive needs to come out. And then the drive carrier. And that's all the further we need to take it down for RGH service. All right, so the console's broken down now, and what we want to do is verify what type of mod and that sort of thing that we're going to do. So we can look here at the 4 gig NAND setup, and this just gives us visual confirmation that this is in fact a 4 gig unit. What I'd like to show you guys is on my main website, regularweekendmodder.com. If you go to the, so this is the main homepage, right? If you go to this final tutorials, check it out here section, you can see that this is a kind of a walkthrough guide, and this is a Slim S series, right? And then, so you have a Slim S series, and if you come down here, this is highlighting a Trinity layout with a 4 gig add-on. And then here, we notice how the header is rotated, which is consistent with what we have. And this tells us that we do in fact have a Corona. So simply looking at this section here, this little header, that tells us, compared to here, that this is in fact a Corona, the vertical header and then the horizontal header. And then the NAND here does look different than ours. If we look at that's got a full 16 megabyte NAND here, whereas our console that we're modifying has this little controller chip kind of in the middle of there without the big piece. So as a reference for that, what you want to do is click here to go to the additional page for Corona, and then here what you'll see is 4 gig NANDs, and I've got it basically spelled out here in the two. So if the little chip in there doesn't come to the edge of the pins, right? If it doesn't hit the edge, that puts it in the 4 gig NAND area. If the chip does come all the way to the edge, it would be a 16 megabyte NAND. So ours looks just like this one, so we are double confirming we do in fact have a 4 gig. Now, the other thing that we need to think about is whether or not we're going to need that postfix adapter. And there's not really a good reference for this that I have that I can point you at, but I'll point it out manually here, is that R2, C6, and 7, so these guys right in here, if these resistors are missing, it is necessary to bridge them so that the E and F points here have their signal. If you look real careful, you can actually see the trace comes up here, goes through this little bridge, and then comes over here and finally terminates at this point. And the one next to it comes up here, goes over this little bridge, right in the middle between them, and then comes over to this point. So if these resistors were missing, we would need to bridge them. However, they are in place. That tells me that this console is very likely to not require a postfix adapter. It's not 100%, and I'll show you another method for identifying if you need a postfix adapter. But if these two resistors are present, you can probably bank on not needing a postfix adapter. If these two resistors are missing, you can probably bank that you do need a postfix adapter. So based on that, my assumption is going to be that I will probably not need a postfix adapter for this console. So as far as preparation and NAND reading and that sort of stuff goes, we will use our fiberglass scratch pin to just kind of polish up these points and make them nice and shiny. So this header we're not going to use for anything, but we will get our power, ground, E, and F signals from this header. So we're going to go ahead and hit that with the fiberglass scratch pin. And you can notice as I'm doing this, the point should just look shinier. That's because we're taking off a coating that was on top of them. See how that one compared to this is definitely less shiny. And then this is the pad where we'll solder the 4 gig reader. This one's probably already shiny enough. It's just kind of habit that I'll run over it again. And then we'll actually attach a wire to this side of this crystal. This is where the 4 gig reader kind of grounds out. So sometimes I run over that one a little bit too. So for the 4 gig tool, we're going to use the reference image that's available right on the SD card page at store.weekendmodder.com. And I've got a copy of it here that I'm going to show you. So the header that we're soldering to, that one that we just hit up, is this guy, rotated sideways actually. So if we're looking at the console, it's in this orientation is that diagram, right, to line it up. So this is 1, 2, 3, da, 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 or 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, blah, blah, blah. And then down this side is 2, 4, 6. So this is that. So if we take a peek at that reference image again, here we go. So we're going to solder to these as outlined, and then on the 4 gig tool itself, the pads are numbered. So you just match up the numbers and solder to solder. As you can see there, my wire on 16 and 11 are both missing. I've got one of them in my hand, so I'll need to replace that here momentarily before we begin. So go ahead and see if we can heat that up and pull out. You can see that there's a little bit of like residual wire right there. So I'm going to heat that up with my iron and then pull that mess out so you can see what was on there. And then we'll replace that wire. Let me look around and see if I can find the one that dropped off. And I don't, but good news, I have lots of wire. So here's one of them. Go ahead and just use a normal little snipping tool to expose some wire on the end. And then what I like to do is pre-tin that. And that's not pretend, but pre-tin. So by just kind of soaking the wire end in some solder before I try to drop it in this pad, it'll just kind of meld together a little quicker. It works out for me. All right, and then so we're going to repeat that process on 11. And this is maybe not a bad example to use because if you bought one of these 4 gig tools from me, you are going to have to be installing your wires yourself anyway. So, because the tool comes with just a little SD card bit, and it does not include the wires. They're just standard little 28 AWG wire bits, but yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and put that on there. And then just for consistency's sake, I'm going to go ahead and trim that guy up at the same length as everybody else. Speaking of wire length and stuff, it's actually relatively important when it comes to this SD tool that these wires be kept as short as you really can. About 2 inches is what I'm looking at here. Maybe a little more could be acceptable. I have had success doing that, but for the most part, you want to go as short as you can. So now back to the actual fun. We'll slide the console back in here. We got the orientation as I mentioned it before, and then we'll go ahead and get that SD card read writer installed. So let me see if I can get the camera to focus a little better. There we go. That's nice and clear. So I'm going to use some flux paste here and just run a drizzle of it over both sides. And then remember that that point on this side of the crystal that I mentioned. So get a little bit over there too. That's what I get for trying to apply it from the camera's view. All right, so I'm referencing that image again. It's available at store.weekendmodder.com on the SD card or SD tool product page, so you can always go grab a copy of it there. First thing I do is just kind of run my iron down, melt out the solder, and then we're just going to go ahead and add a little bit more solder to each of the pads that we're going to be connecting to. So the first one that I'm hitting here is really working against me. There we go. So what you should end up with is just kind of a little bulge of solder on there, but not overlapping to the guy beside it. So that was 2, and then either of the next 2 pads can be your ground. So I like to skip one and then do it there. And then the next 3 after that are unused. So it's these final 2 that are 14 and 16. So we'll go ahead and do 14 and then 16. All right, I'm going to take a little bit back there. There we go. All right, so that's the ones that we're going to solder on that side, and these might have a little bit of excess on them, so I'm just kind of taking it back and making sure. Again, the idea is that they shouldn't touch or bridge. So on this side, top point is number 1, or pad number 1 per the image, and then we have 3 right next to it. And then it skips the next 3 pads so that these next 2 are 11 and 13. And finally 15 is left alone there. So we've got those pre-tinned and ready to go. We'll go ahead and do the same thing on this side of that crystal resistor over here. So there's a little pad kind of, and you just add a little blob of solder to it. Now, on the tool itself, that line to that little crystal, it says C here. So the C line, oh, let's focus. Focus, camera. Focus, there we go. The C line has a black wire on it just because, well, that's what I used. And that will go to the crystal. So you can see I've got that black wire attached to this little quick connect disconnect. You do not need this. It is not required. It's just handy. So if you have a little set of like Arduino, what's the word I'm looking for? Like breadboard boxes or connectors where you can quick disconnect and reconnect the little pin, that's real handy. Otherwise, you can totally just directly solder the wire from there and then just solder and unsolder it as required. I just find it handy to have the little quick disconnect because we will actually be connecting and disconnecting this wire a couple of times during the install process. So we've got that one installed, and then we'll hit the rest of the points here now. So as I do this, I'm just going to look on the labels on the SD tool itself, isolate that wire that we want to connect, and then install that puppy. So the first one that we'll do is actually 0.2 as it's numbered in the diagram. So we're going to go, this is the wire for 2, and just connect it like so. All right, the next one that we're doing there is ground. That's labeled G on the SD tool, G for ground, right? It's Amazing, what a surprise. All right, and then we're gonna hit that one there. So I know you got these guys in the way. Sorry about that. So there's our G for ground wire. And then our last two are 14 and 16. So here's the 14 wire. And so the technique is the same as I've explained a lot of times. It's basically put your iron on the little blob of solder that you place so it melts, insert the wire into that, and then pull your iron back so that the blob of solder cools, with your wire embedded in it. So the last one here is 16, and we'll do that the same way. So there's 16 connected. All right, now for the top row, which you can see why I did the bottom row first, because all the wires are coming from this way. So if I had already done this row, it would have been really difficult to go underneath it. So the order of which side I do is intentional there. So the top row is wire 1. So here we go, 1. I'm trying to move these other ones out of the way. There we go. 1. Oh, the black wire's in there. 1, 1, 1. So there's wire 1, and then 3 will be our next guy. So here's 3. So there's 3. Then 11. So here's our 11 wire. And look at that, I don't really have anything exposed on the end of that 11 wire. So I need to carefully trim a little bit of the insulation off. And that was definitely too much. I'll pre-tin that little length. And then I'm actually going to trim that. So you can see here, if I lay it down like that, it's got quite a length of exposed wire now. And I really want that to just be just a little nubbin like that. So there's just a tiny bit of exposed metal. All right, so that was our 11. And then finally 13. There we go. So that is our 4 gig tool installed. It is kind of a lot of wires, but it goes pretty fast. So now that that's installed, I'm going to go ahead and rotate my console because my power wires and stuff are over there. I'm going to bring a couple of things out here. So I'm going to need my USB extension that's connected to my PC here. I'm going to need an SD card reader writer. So I've got a few of those. Definitely a good idea to have a couple of 2 or 3 different kinds due to kind of some of the finickiness of this stuff. But this particular one I really like. It's available on Amazon and at Micro Center stores. It's just a really basic full-size SD card reader writer. Works pretty well most of the time. And then we need to connect power to the console. One other thing that I don't really like to do is to power up the console and just leave the tool like this. If you look, I mean, just like an SD card, this thing has exposed metal contacts on the back. If that's grounding out against the case here, I've never really had it be a problem, but it definitely could present an issue. So I'll oftentimes just take like a little piece of paper, because that's insulator, and then just kind of set it like that so it's not accidentally, like grounding out on the case of the console. So for right now, we want the C wire connected to the crystal. So I did that via plugging into my little quick disconnect. You may have a wire soldered directly from there to there. It doesn't really matter. And then now we want to go ahead and apply standby power. So I've got my my power cable. I'm plugging that in. And we should see no lights on the SD card until we connect it to an SD card reader writer. So let's go ahead and do that. I've got JRunner up, so I'm going to go up to that. Well, let me just show you. So the way I like to do it is to hold the card by kind of either side of it here, and then slide the SD card reader writer up it, and then insert. So your light should come on, and I'm actually going to just continue to hold it just like this steady the whole time we're messing with it. So I'm going to go back up to JRunner. I'm going to go ahead and click Read NAND. It asks me for this input name, which I just say OK to, don't fill out. I'm going to say it's a Corona 4 gig. It brings up this option. So this should tell me physical drive letter, and I should see a size reported here. And it should be real close to what I see reported here. So this one says 3588. It should be somewhere between like 35 and 4096 sort of thing. They're sometimes a little bit varied, but you should see a size populated here. If you don't see a size populated there, you may need to reinstall your SD tool, try a different SD card reader writer, that sort of stuff. But mine is showing up, so I'm good. So I'm going to go ahead and say read. It's going to perform. Okay, so this is actually good. So you can see what happened here. It started to try to read, and then it threw an IO system error and then crashed out. And if I was to refresh the drive list right now, I can still see it there. So I can give it another shot, but most likely JRunner is going to crash at this point. So file already exists, it'll be deleted. Yep, that's fine. So it's making it further this time, but it's still timing out. So the first thing that I like to try when I have little timeouts like that is actually just to switch SD card reader writers. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug my standby power real quick. I'm going to unplug my current SD card reader writer from my USB, and I'm going to grab a different one here. Let's see if I can find the one. I've got an old one that's like war beaten. So I actually have, if you look here, I have 3 of these readers, but this one I have had for like 5 years, and for some reason it seems to be able to do some stuff and read these when the other newer ones sometimes don't. I also have a Sabrent USB 3 SD card reader, and this one will sometimes pull it off when the other ones won't. So it's handy to have multiple of these for sure when it comes to the 4 gig. So I'm going to plug power back in, right? My crystal line is still connected. I'm going to go ahead and plug in the SD card reader writer, and I am going to go ahead and replug that in. So here we go. Go ahead and reconnect that. Oh, it's upside down. Go ahead and reconnect that. All right. And then let's go back to JRunner. Say read NAND again. Say OK at the input. Say refresh drive list. So now it's a different drive letter, but whatever. We still see the size. So let's say read again and see if we get better success. See, look at that. This thing's speeding along. Bloop. Oh, makes it to the end. It's going to hang. Yep, it still threw an error. Okay. So I'm going to try taking a look at the install here and see if I see some sort of issue. So I disconnected my standby power. I unplugged. This wire is pretty firmly connected. So what I'm doing is just giving everything a gentle but firm, which those are conflicting ideas, but just kind of a tug to make sure that we've got good connections. Because these are stranded wire, meaning they're made up of lots of little different wires all wrapped together, right? It's a stranded 28 or so AWG wire. And sometimes these will, as they get moved around and work themselves loose, only be hanging on like by a single strand. And my guess is that can't conduct enough energy through to effectively read. So giving all of these a tug, looking at that, checking for any bridges. Any areas that look like the pads are, come on, if I cover it and then let it go. There we go. Checking to see that any pads are connected to each other. They should all be totally separate and not interconnected in any way, which they don't appear to be. Check the back for the same thing. It looks like that's okay as well. Finally, looking at the NAND install points as well. So actually the camera's being pretty helpful because it can see closer than I can here. So I don't know. It looks like maybe do we have some bridging there on that one on the end? Let me see if I can use my iron and kind of pull them away from each other a little bit. So be real sure your power is disconnected before you do this. All right, so those are now a little further apart than they were. That one still looks okay. These two, they don't really look bridged, but a little bit of touch up sometimes makes all the difference. And touching up the bottom row underneath there, again, is kind of a challenge. So you want to make sure those are right. So I think we're okay. Let's give it another read attempt. All right, so my C wire is still connected to where the crystal is. I'm plugging in standby power. I'm going to go ahead and connect my SD tool. It lights up like we expect. That's good. So we'll go back up to JRunner. We'll say refresh the drive list. There it is. Let's try to read again. Now it's not going anywhere. Oh, failed to get disk geometry. That's not a great error. I'm going to restart JRunner just in case that might be related. So I've got the application down here. It's probably going to black out my screen for a second. Yep, there we go. So here we go. We're going to say read NAND. We'll say OK. Go Corona 4 gig. There it is. We're going to say read again. Let's see what happens. Oh, make it. Don't freeze. Ah, it froze. Okay, so I'm thinking that in this particular case, we might have kind of some funky install stuff because it's frozen here. It hasn't stopped or hasn't errored, but it's not progressing any further. So I'm going to close JRunner again, and then reopen it and go back to disconnect power, disconnect this guy, disconnect my crystal wire, and let's see about touching this up a little bit more aggressively here. So this one was the one that we thought, or that I thought might be an issue here. I'm going to disconnect that wire entirely real quick. So I don't see any bridges there. I'm going to disconnect this one as well real quick just to look at these two. So those look totally fine. However, just for the sake of trying to not take forever on this, I'm just going to retouch each of them. Kind of try to make sure they have a good connection. And then I'll replace these. So there's 3. There's 1 again. And then I'll do the same over here. So I'm going to retouch that one. This looks okay. So let's just redo these 2 that were under there. So this one, just get it nice and reliquefied, just in case there was some sort of connection issue. All right, so that one is 11. Oh, come on. Okay, this one is 11. This one is 13. So there's 13 reconnected. There's 11 reconnected, and I'm just giving them each a little tug here. All right, so we've kind of retouched up the points here. It doesn't always happen for me. Most of the time I can get this thing first go, probably 90% of the time. But I'm kind of glad that it happened on video here, so you guys can see what my my troubleshooting process is like. All right, so we're reconnecting that crystal line. We'll go ahead and reconnect standby power. I'm going to go ahead and unplug and replug my SD card reader writer. And we will reconnect it. I keep doing that upside down. All right. So we've got that guy. Let's go back up to JRunner and say read NAND. Okay. It's Corona 4 gig. There it is. Read. Okay. Oh, that's nice and fast. Let's see if it makes it. Hey, there it was. We got one good read. Okay, cool. So here's another good example. This happens to me fairly regularly as well. You'll get one good read, and then the other one will stall out. So what I like to do in that circumstance is close it, not close JRunner altogether. Go ahead and disconnect. Go ahead and unplug standby power. Right, I just unplugged. And then we're going to need to do a little bit of work. So I just got this notice, JRunner stopped working. It's going to go ahead and close. So I'm going to relaunch JRunner real quick. And here's the trick, is that what you want to do is hit this show working folder. The working folder is, the idea is that's where the application is working out of. So what you've got here on this is your output folder for JRunner. And you can see there's two files here already, a NANDump1 that's 49,152 kilobytes, and a NANDump2 that's way smaller. It's less than 8 megabytes. So first of all, we know this file is garbage, so we can just delete it, right? This file, I believe to be a good NAND read of this console. But if I leave it named NANDump1, the next time I try to read again, it's going to fail. It's going to say, hey, this file already exists. I'm going to overwrite it. So what I'm going to do real quick is actually just change that file name to be -1, whatever. So that when JRunner goes to create the new file, it won't be overwriting this one. It'll have a unique name. So we've got JRunner back up. We're just going to repeat the process and use two NAND reads from separate attempts, and we can compare them and be pretty confident that everything's still okay. So go ahead and plug back in our standby power. Go ahead and reconnect our SD card reader writer. So that USB sound, this particular reader writer will sometimes kind of become disconnected. So, all right, we'll hold it there. The light's on. We're going to try another read. So read NAND. Okay, Corona 4 gig. Right here, read. Let's see, we got another one. And then let's see if it stalls. So it stalled out on NANDump2 again. But if you were looking in the background there, see what happened is we created a new NANDump1, a new NANDump2. But look what we got. Oh, well, we got a JRunner crash is what we got. Close. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect. I'm going to go ahead and unplug power. And then we'll go back to JRunner here. So what we have here is a valid NANDump1, a bogus NANDump2. So we can go ahead and delete that. And then this one, these are the same size. The size alone doesn't give me a validation that they're the same, that they're valid. But we can use JRunner itself to do that. And what I'll do just for simplicity's sake is actually rename this file to nandump2.bin. So now when we go ahead and relaunch JRunner, we can load source, go into that output folder, and then load the NANDump1, load extra, load the NANDump2. So those are the two files that we had. We could say NAND compare, and it does give us the NANDs are the same, right? So possibly 4 gig Corona, which is exactly right. Not checking for bad blocks, which is fine. So we have just successfully dumped, although laboriously, the NAND in duplicate, which is what we need. So in this case, we are going to RGH2 or sRGH this console. So we do not need the CR4 tick box selected. We just need glitch 2 for RGH2. We've got our dash version, which doesn't really matter at this point, but that is current. So we're going to say create the ECC file right now, because the next time we hook up the SD card reader, what we'll do is actually write that ECC file to the NAND of the console. I'm not going to do that right this second though, because at this point, the only thing that we've done is read the NANDs, right? We haven't modified them in any way. So if we come back to the console here and we disconnect this wire, right, this line to the crystal, and we keep our little paper in place, if we go ahead and plug in HDMI and we reconnect power, we should actually be able to still boot this console completely normally. So I'm going to use my little infrared remote here, turn it on. The light should come on the SD tool like this with this wire disconnected, not grounded out anywhere. And look, we got a standard normal boot here. And here it comes up on the on screen. So we're still bootable. Like we can prove that we haven't damaged the console. It's running right now, even with this SD tool still connected. As long as that crystal wire from C to that point is disconnected, the console can boot. When that C wire is connected to here, the NAND is being redirected out through this, and the console won't boot. So if I was to turn everything off, plug this in, and then retry my boot, it would fail. This wire has to be disconnected. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the console off. And what we'll do is we'll install our glitch chip now, but we'll keep the console in this bootable state so that at any point, if we're nervous that we've done some sort of damage to the console, we can simply power the thing up and verify that it still boots. And we can do that as long as we haven't written anything else to the NAND. Because once we write that ECC file to the NAND, the console will only boot if it has a correctly installed glitch chip in it. So, as far as what we're going to do next here, so on this reference image, we've got the Corona NAND right here. So you can see this is the 16 megabyte NAND points that you would use in NANDEX, these colored points, black, brown, red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. But also labeled in here, we have the 5-volt power point, a ground point, E, F, and then if needed, a 3-volt point. Well, the ACE V3 is a 5-volt chip, so we're going to use that power point. We'll use ground from here, and then we will be using E and F from this location. So the next things we're going to do is go ahead and pre-tin those pads. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 right there. So let's do that. So there's that header. We'll hit it with some flux paste on the left side here, because that's where we're going to be tinning up pads. So the first one I like to do is this ground. Ground points often take holding the iron to them for longer because they're dissipating heat out through the ground plane. So I'm just holding my iron on there with some solder on it, and once it's heated up enough, it will go ahead and stick. So sometimes it helps to add a little more. There we go. So there's that ground, which is sometimes trouble. You'll see how compared to how long I just held it on there, when I do this 5-volt point on the end, the amount of time that I end up having to hold it on there is much less, right? And then E and F will be the same way, much less time to actually heat them up and get some solder to stick to the pad. There we go. So those are 5-volt, ground, E, and F right there. So we can go ahead and position our glitch chip now. So straight out of the package, no modification, no need to write a timing file to it. Again, the ACE V3 comes pre-programmed with the timing file. So we're just going to peel off the little adhesive here, stick it to the back of this guy, peel off the other side of the adhesive. Oh man, it's like I'm a retard. I can't open a sticker. All right. And then the way I orient it is actually with the pads away from those points because the wires are a little longer. Generally, what I kind of do is this little IC that's up here, I just kind of bump it up against that, and then place it down right there. So it's just gonna be adhered and stuck right there, no problem. There's nothing under right there that you need access to. So I'm gonna go ahead and pre-tin the pads on this one. So I'm just gonna hold my iron to each of the little spots and give it a little solder spot. Okay. And then now the wires that come in the packaging here. So they're actually really useful. They're totally adequate, not like you need some sort of fancy wire or anything. So I just kind of cut the package there so I can rip it open and get to these guys. Now there are going to be some longer wires and some shorter wires. So there's two different lengths in here. You can see those are kind of the shorter ones. And then you can see these are almost twice as long, right? So I'm going to set these to the side right now, the long ones, and I'm going to just use one of the shorter ones to begin with to show you. But what's kind of important here is that you can see there's a fairly significant amount of exposed wire on the end of these guys. Focus. I don't know. It's hard to, there we go. So that much exposed pre-tinned wire is really overkill, and it's going to lead to an ugly install and potentially bridging and stuff like that. So really all you want to do is take your normal little snipping tool and trim that back so that it's basically just barely visible on the end of this guy. So compared to what it was, I'll make it a U shape so that you can see my trimmed in versus my untrimmed in. All right, come on. Come on. Maybe we can do it if we go down here. There we go. So you can see the trimmed in is actually, I might could have even been a little more aggressive than that, but the trimmed end is significantly, it's half or less of what it comes with there. And that's going to be for the point that I go to on the board. The untrimmed end here will be fine for connecting to these big old giant pads, but for stuff that's close to each other up here, you're going to want to use that trimmed end so that you don't have ugly, like overlapping bridged points. So first thing we'll do is take that untrimmed end and stick it down in the ground point, right? So I'm just remelting that solder that I laid down a minute ago and sticking the ground in it. And then up here, same technique. I remelt the little solder ball and I stick that wire end right in it. So now we've got ground wired up. The next step we could do would be power, and then E and F right there. And so I'm doing it off camera, but real quickly on the other wires, I'm on one end trimming them like I did that first one. So now I've got 3 more wires trimmed roughly, the same technique here. So we'll go to the 5-volt point here. Insert that wire, and then the long untrimmed side, which you could trim both sides, it wouldn't matter. We'll go into that 5-volt pad, and then we'll do E. So with that one, what I do is I kind of bend the wire into a hook, so it's coming at it from the top. And then again, the technique is just melt the pad, stick the wire end into it, and then pull your iron away. So there's E, and then finally F. I kind of bend it up so it's coming at it from the bottom, and then I again melt the pad, stick the wire end, and then that's our F wire. So now we have everything except for C, which is post, and D, which is the RST or the reset signal installed. So we're actually most of the way done with our glitch chip install already. So in order to handle those, we're going to need access to the underside of the motherboard now. So we need to go ahead and pull out the ring of light. And then what I do is apply a little bit of pressure in this direction. Oh, I'm flipping you guys off. In this direction to lift up the motherboard enough so that I can kind of get under it here, and then I can pull the full thing out of the case entirely. So I mentioned before I'd give you another method to figure out whether or not you need a postfix adapter, and this is that time. So we said that R2, C6, and 7, those little resistors being present or not, gives us a good indicator of whether or not we're going to need that postfix adapter. But the 100% absolute way to tell is by looking at the traces underneath the heatsink to see whether they are intact or not. And I'm going to show you a reference image real quick. So underneath the heatsink, there's this area that has traces that go to a series of pins on the or pads on the underside of the motherboard. And in this, you can see all these little lines that are running up to these spots here. So that's the traces are present, and that would not require a postfix adapter. But if you look at this comparison image here, you see all those little lines are missing, so those traces are not present, and this console would require a postfix adapter. So to live that out with our own actual console here, what I'm going to do real quick is actually use small piece of tape to tape the SD tool to the motherboard so that when I turn it over, it doesn't just like flop around and flop loose. So we'll flip it over here, and then I'm going to use the X-clamp removal tool here to just pop up the X-clamp. These are also available on my website, store.weekendmodder.com, for like $2. They're super cheap and super handy. So if you flip it back over, now without that X-clamp to retain it, we can just pull the heatsink off and set it off to the side. And here we go. This is the area that I was talking about with the traces in that reference image. Let's see if... There we go. So you can see here, all of these traces are present, which is what we expected based on the fact that R2, C6, and 7 were still in place. So all of this row of traces running up here are still here. All the little lines are still in place. So that's good news. That's what we want to see. And then now, kind of for me, and you guys obviously do what you want, but anytime I remove the heatsink on a customer's console, and this particular console is a customer console for Angie M of state. What state is T? Oh, that must be TN, so Tennessee. I remove the old, what is this stuff? Thermal paste, and we'll replace it with fresh because this stuff just dries out and gets old over time. You just need to replace it sometimes. So we'll go ahead and clean that off. I just have some rubbing alcohol soaked on this little cotton pad, and then I go ahead and clean it off on the heatsink as well. And it doesn't need to be perfect because you're just going to reapply. And that copper disc in the center is really where the thermal conduction is happening anyway. So go ahead and grab my, where's my little plastic applicator thing? Okay, who cares? So I have some thermal take thermal paste that's real nice quality that I like to use, and that's an excessive amount here. But what I'm going to do is actually just pull it down across the face. And some people like to use the whole pea-size technique thing. I like to just kind of evenly distribute the thermal paste. It's okay if there's a little bit extra, but you don't want to leave like a huge mound of it. So I'm taking back the majority of what I put on there and just have kind of a thin coating over the whole thing. The idea is to create a thermal bond, not to glue it together or anything crazy like that. So we can go ahead. There was really no reason. If you had a console exactly like this one and you had R2, C6, and 7 still in place, I personally don't even bother to take the heatsink off to verify that those traces are in place. It's a darn safe assumption. However, if you do that, you do have to realize that every once in a great while, I mean, I've done 1,000 consoles, so I've got a pretty big sample size. Every once in a great while, the post traces will not be there, even though those resistors were, and you'll be left kind of scratching your head about why your install isn't working. And you need to basically be smart enough to go, oh, let me check for the post traces and figure that out. So since we've got it on the other underside of the motherboard here, we'll talk about the two last points, again, C and D. So all of those traces and everything, you know how they were going to those diagonal pads? Well, this is them on the back side of the motherboard. And basically the way I think about it is if you count one over, one up, and one over again, that little guy is your C or post point, right? So post is going to be that one right there. And then for D, for RST signal, if you look at this little right next to the hole, if you look at this row of pads going right up here, you actually want this top one. Let's see, I've got a reference image here too built into this one. Upper monitor. So you want this top one in that row going up from the hole here. So if we go back to our console, again, the one we're working on right now, so it's this row coming up. It's actually that tiny little point right there at the end. So that's going to be our D or RST point, and this is going to be our C or post point right there. So we can go ahead and install both of those now and then route them through to the top side of the motherboard. So same story, I'm going to trim one side of the ends of this wire, and for that little bitty pad point right here, I like to throw a little bit of flux on it. And then I'll do the same over here for C. So just a tiny bit of flux really does help when it comes to getting your solder to stick and not burning the board and all that sort of stuff. So I'm just putting my iron right on top of it, flowing some more solder on there, make sure my iron has plenty of solder on it. Then I'm just going to hold my wire right over that point and then kind of do that again. So I've just installed, and then let's see if we can get you in and let you look at how tiny that really is. So that wire, the reason trimming it was good was because the exposed length would be way out there, and we don't want to accidentally bridge against one of these other pads. So that one is going there. But that thing's like really quite tiny and fairly fragile. So the other thing that I suggest that you do is whether it be tape, electrical, some Kapton tape if you have that, or in my case, what I like to do is hot glue, is back away from the point, not over covering the point, but back from it some. I go ahead and put kind of a glob of hot glue on there. And that's so that if any point down the road somebody were to tug on this wire, instead of ripping that pad off, the hot glue will help kind of reinforce it and give it some strength, right? So from there, for the D wire, what you're going to want to do is actually pop it up right through this guy, the hole near the south bridge. My hot glue is still not quite dry yet, so hold on a second. So it goes right in that hole by the south bridge, and then from the underside you can just kind of pull it taut, so it should look something like that. And then if we flip it over from this side, you can see it's come out right here, not too far away from the chip, and that becomes real easy to just kind of loop and then just install the other end right to the D-pad. And then since we're here, I like to go ahead and just take the C wire and install one of the long ends there. And then we run over to the next hole, right? So we pop that guy in there, and then from the underside, just kind of pull it taut so it's going straight over. And then again, I'm going to trim it so that it's not quite so long. And what I'll do is I'll kind of bend a hook into the end of this wire just with my fingers, because what we're going to do when we get it over here is get that guy onto that post point. So after I've got kind of a hook bent into it, I'll bring it over here and we'll tack her down. Let me get you guys in closer here. All right, so first thing, I'm going to put my iron on the spot, give that one a little bit of solder on it. I'm going to grab the wire with my tweezers here and get that end right on the pad that we want and just tack her down. So we got just that pad. We're not crossing any others. And yeah, so that's how we would install that one. And then I'll use that same type of cotton round here. I get these at the dollar store in like 100-pack for $1. Put a little bit of rubbing alcohol on it and just clean up some of that flux that was on there. I'm just kind of rubbing it real gently on that spot, just so that we don't, leave flux residue behind. It probably wouldn't hurt the console at all, but cleaning up your mess is a good thing to do. So I'm holding that down away from the X-clamp a little bit because I'm going to do the same thing again with the hot glue. So I'm going to give this thing a little bit of reinforcement so that if somebody tugs on this thing down the road, it's not going to immediately just rip that pad off. Blow on it a little bit. All right, so now our C and D wires are installed. Our glitch chip is actually 100% installed now. We are totally ready to go ahead and write the ECC file and try to boot Zell to get our CPU key, which is really what all this has been about. So, excuse me, I apologize. So one thing left that we can do, because we have not written anything to the NAND yet, is if we just go ahead and disconnect the power wire only. So I'm only unsoldering the 5-volt wire. I'm just pulling it up and out of the way there. We should still be able to boot this console to retail normal stock dash. Even though it's got an SD tool installed in it, even though it's got the ACE V3, everything else, the ACE isn't getting power because we just disconnected that. So let's go ahead and put our little piece of paper back and take this piece of tape off, right? So again, we don't want to ground it out. We're going to leave our C wire disconnected because we want the console to be able to boot, right? You want to make sure that doesn't ground out on anything either. We've got our power wire for our glitch chip disconnected. And then let me go ahead and reinsert the ring of light board. So now HDMI and power. And check this guy out. We'll use the remote again. And we should get standard boot. There we go. And then the Xbox screen should come right back up. So we've just proved to ourselves that despite all of the installation that we've done, our console has still booted retail, and we know we haven't damaged the thing yet. This is a good check, a good stop point for a newbie. I don't do this daily. I've RGH, 5, 7, 10 consoles a day sometimes. But for somebody who's starting out, this is absolutely a really great safety / checkpoint, whatever. So we'll go ahead and turn the console off, disconnect our power, and now we just need to reconnect our power wire to our glitch chip. So I'm just resoldering that 5-volt wire real fast. And then what we want to do is plug our C wire or crystal wire back into our quick disconnect, or if you have a direct wire, just resolder it back to this guy. And then we'll hook up our SD card reader writer and write that ECC file that we created before. So I'm going to go ahead and apply my standby power again. I'm going to plug this into my SD tool. We'll go back to the JRunner software. Right here, it's in the foreground. So we've got the ECC file already loaded from where we created it. So we just need to click Write ECC. We select it and we say write. We're about to write, continue, yes. So we're writing, and then it happens like super duper fast, 1 second. As long as you see this done, then you did fine, you're good. You can come back down to the console. You can disconnect the SD tool, unplug power for just a moment. Now, we have the ECC written to the console. We have the glitch chip installed and power wire to it connected, so it is going to get power. We didn't have to change the timing file because it comes with a built-in timing file for Coronas. So we want to disconnect our crystal wire so that the console can boot, right? So we don't want that connected at this point. So you could desolder it if you have a direct wire, or I just have my quick disconnect. And then we can go ahead and reapply power. And then I'm going to do something to make my life a little easier. Is I'm going to go ahead and connect an Ethernet cable that's run to my router, my switch, whatever you want to call it. Because when Zell boots, if there is an Ethernet connection available, it will actually make the CPU key available across the Ethernet rather than having to like type it out. So when I hit the power on the remote here, what should happen is that we should see some pulsing, some green light flashing on the glitch chip, and then within a few pulses, hopefully, we should get a successful boot, and then on screen what will display, because we've just written the ECC file, should be Zell. So here goes. So here we are powering it up. There was a green pulse. Okay, there's another green pulse. On the Corona consoles, if you hear a real high-pitched whining, noise, ringing kind of noise coming out of the fan, that's totally normal. Actually, if you count that, they correspond with each time the light will light up. So that can be an indicator for how many glitch cycles it takes here. So we're still pulsing away, right? It hasn't booted yet. Oh, I say that, and look, we just got our successful boot. And if we flip over to the Xbox screen here, look at that. We've got Zell. So what it says right here is requesting DHCP. That means it's trying to get an IP address, which it just did successfully. So when it gets all the way down here to the bottom, we have the CPU key and DVD key presented to us. And the CPU key is really the only one we care about. But then it also sees where it says network config 192.168.1.110. Well, what I can do, because it's on my network now, is I can go into JRunner, and I've got that 192.168.1, and then I can just enter 110, and I can say get CPU key, and it just sucks that CPU key in over the network rather than me having to type it out, so it saves me a little bit of work. So back to the console, we can go ahead and power that thing off now. We don't need it on presently, right? And I'm going to go ahead and disconnect that Ethernet cable because I don't want to accidentally get this thing online and get it banned or anything. I only wanted to be able to pull in that CPU key over Zell. And then I'm going to go ahead and disconnect power. So what we have now are the makings of everything that JRunner needs to create the final XE build image, right? We have the original NAND. We have the CPU key, which is the secret encryption key for the whole deal, makes all this work. We've got our glitch 2 selected. We are not checking the CR4 because we're using the default timing built into the ACE v3. So we just have glitch 2 selected. We have our current dashboard 17511 selected. So really all we have to do at this point is say create XE build image. This warning is normal, SMC delete it, question. So the question is, do you want to delete it? And then it gives you some advice. It says, unless you put it there, delete it. So do you want to delete it? Yes, I want to delete it because I didn't explicitly put it there. That's what this is saying logically. So it starts a little chain down here in the log, right? And it's going to spit a whole bunch of text out. But what you're really looking for at the end is images ready, upd flash.bin, right? We've created a upd flash.bin. And actually, if we go to the source entry and we scroll that over now, you can see that upd flash.bin is what's in primary. So now we need a way to actually write this to the console. So for the final time, we need to hook up the SD tool and write the upd flash.bin to the console because that's our modded NAND. So what you'll do is come over here, reconnect your crystal line, right? Because that's what puts it in read-write mode through the SD tool. We'll go ahead and reconnect our standby power and then plug in our SD card. We get our light that comes on, and then when we go up into JRunner, we should click write NAND, see the drive and everything, and we'll say write one more time. Are you sure you're about to write? Yes. And what we should see here is a nice little progress bar come over, and we get this nice done message. It takes about 3 or 4 seconds, so that's fantastic. We got exactly what we wanted. We can now disconnect the SD tool, disconnect power, disconnect the crystal wire, because now it's back in boot mode. And that's all we need to do real quick to just verify that we are in fact able to boot that XE build UPD flash.bin. So we've got the crystal wire disconnected, or again, if you're using a direct wire, just unsolder. We've got the Ethernet removed, right? I've got HDMI in, and then I'm just going to reconnect power and turn this bad boy on. So we see the pulsing, and then pretty quick like, hopefully pretty quick like, right? First boot, first glitch insta boot, we got that animation, and it should look like a kind of stock Xbox booting up at this point. So here we've got it completely stock, and this is kind of normal too. This is, if you've never bought an Xbox brand new from the store, this is that first run screen. So you can actually just walk through that real quick by going through, oh, I'm in English, I'm in the United States, no, I don't want content controls, no, I don't want to connect to a network right now, connect later. And then I think the last thing it tries to get you to sign up for Xbox Live, just say go play, and then hit that. And there you are, out to the stock dashboard with your data still intact, right? That's the customer's profiles and stuff. So we have just proven that this console is now successfully booting the UPD flash.bin image. So I'm going to go ahead and power the console back off and disconnect both the HDMI and the power from it. And we can actually just remove the SD tool as our final step here. So I'm going to grab my tweezers and we'll just carefully go through each one of those spots for the SD tool and disconnect those wires. If the SD tool was yours and you only ever intended to do a single console, what you could do is wrap the thing in like electrical tape so that it doesn't ground out. Because as you noticed, it will boot with the thing still installed. You could leave it installed and simply leave the crystal wire disconnected. And that would allow you to have the 4 gig read-write thing always installed, so that if you ever screw up in the future and like brick the console by writing a bogus NAND to it via software, all you would have to do is take your case off, reconnect your crystal wire, and then you would have your SD tool already in here. You could just leave it laying flat down in here. Again, after putting some electrical tape over the exposed metal bits so that you didn't ground it off. But that's totally doable. It is possible. However, in this particular case, this is a customer's console. They're going to be able to update their console via software if they choose to do updates and stuff. So I don't leave those in. It's something that I could be talked into for an additional service or something. Plus, there's the cost of the tool itself. If you're doing consoles over and over, you want to reuse your tool instead of leaving it in the console. So what I'm doing now is just cleaning up some of that flux residue that was around on the board with my little cotton ball soaked with some rubbing alcohol. And that is just as a last cleanup effort. And we can essentially start the console reassembly now. So I'm going to do just a little bit of reassembly so you guys kind of have an understanding of the next steps. Because one of the questions that I get asked pretty frequently is, okay, great, you taught me how to do the hardware mod, but what do I do now, right? Like, I got the RGH going. What's the first thing to do? What's the first step to take? And really it's just to start installing whatever software it is that you want. There are tutorials and guides available that show you how to install XEX menu, which is a good first one to start with. And then from there, like Freestyle Dash, Dash Launch, all those sort of things. So I'm just going to put this guy together just enough so that it's complete as far as the disk drive and stuff goes, but I won't put the top lid on or any of the screws or anything. So that's a mostly reassembled console, RGH using an ACE V3 and its default timing file on a Corona V1, V2 4 gig, right? So I've just reconnected power and HDMI, and we'll go ahead and boot the thing up. And so I don't know if you can hear it, but it's got that little high-pitched ringing, and then it did once and has booted. So we've got insta boots out of this thing, which is great. Let me go ahead and sync a controller here. So we've got the controller on. Oh, look, I had this one synced before. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the sign in. And then we'll right bumper all the way over to, let me turn on the pass-through monitor so I can see a little faster there. There we go. So what I'm doing now is I have a USB that I have preloaded with some software, but I just want to say that, again, there are gobs of tutorials out there on how to load XEX menu to the USB. Grab one of those tutorials and follow it. Pop your USB in, and then now that you're in the system menu, you're just going to go down to storage. You're going to go over to your USB, your memory unit. Oh, that's the memory. That's the console's memory unit, right? We're going to go to the USB stick memory unit. Go down to demos where you installed XEX menu and simply copy it. So you got to sign into a profile. I'm going to sign into a profile. Do I want to apply and check for updates? You have to say yes to this, and then you can say no to the second question. Then you'll say copy to the onboard memory unit. And we are now effectively copying XEX menu from that USB onto the onboard 4 gigs of storage, which is kind of slow. So this takes a second. All right, so now that we've copied XEX menu to it, when we back out to the dash, if we go to the Games tab here, you'll see that there's actually 2 copies of XEX menu now. That's because one of them is on the onboard memory unit, and one of them is on the USB. We could actually just, which I'll do real fast, if I unplug the USB now, one of those will disappear because we've got XEX menu that's left on the console, and we can go ahead and launch that and continue to use the console from there. That will allow us. XEX menu has the feature of being able to rip games to the hard drive. You could use it to help load Dash Launch, all that sort of stuff. So in a little bit over an hour, with a whole lot of over-explaining included in there, we have just walked through end to end with absolute completeness the installation of an ACE V3 to RGH, a 4 gig Corona motherboard slim S series console. So I hope that was helpful. If you like what I do and you want to support me, consider buying some of your supplies from store.weekendmodder.com. I'm definitely not the cheapest guy ever. I have fair prices, but hopefully you consider the value of my tutorials and knowledge sharing when you think about maybe supporting me and picking up a tool or two from me. So thank you very much. Enjoy, and catch you guys later.